Could Diddy get bail? May sound like a long shot, but is there something that could maybe change the judge's mind? Well, we're going to be speaking with the bail bondsman to the stars, Ira Judelson, about whether Diddy may get out in a rumored new bail package. He has been working with Diddy's team. Plus, what can we expect about whether the rap mogul will spend the next decade or two behind?
The courtroom fell silent. Cameras clicked. Reporters leaned forward. And then came the words that sent a shockwave through everyone watching. Bail denied again, even after the final verdict.
Question we're getting in the Sean Combs post-verdict world is, what's next? Right? After being convicted of 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution and acquitted of racketeering conspiracy and 2 counts of sex trafficking, now we ask, what is his sentence going to be on those 2 charges, the Mann Act charges? And there's also another question that we're going to address today. Could he get bail? Could he get out? You might be saying, Jesse, wait a second. He was denied bail at every turn. And you would be right, he was. Despite proposing extensive bail conditions during the course of this legal saga, including a $50 million bail package and monitoring by private security personnel, the court was not convinced. Now, by law, the defense has the burden to prove that Combs is not a flight risk or danger to the community. And given the charges, the allegations, including that he was improperly trying to contact people in the case pre-trial, he was always denied release. But then there's what happened after the verdict last week. And this is an interesting conversation. And again, we're going to be speaking with Ira Judelson in a minute, who's been working with Diddy's team on possibly getting him released. But after the verdict, the defense applied for Combs to be released from detention pending sentencing. But that request was again denied by Judge Arun Subramanian. The defense argued, look, he's no longer charged with RICO, there's no longer presumption of detention, we have his passport, there's no access to private planes, there's no criminal history, this is his first conviction, he would be a fool to mess any of this up because he was just given his life back by the jury, he wasn't convicted of the highest charges, he was facing up to life in prison, now he's not. He should be allowed to return to his property, his mansion in Florida. There'll be a $1 million bond. Now, the government argued, look, Sean Combs, he was convicted of serious charges, Mann Act violations. There was physical abuse in this case. There was prolific use and distribution of drugs. He committed crimes while under investigation, including having drugs in his hotel room when he planned to surrender to federal authorities back in September of 2024. And Judge Arun Subramanian denied the bail application, sided with the government, that these convictions on these charges, by law, they trigger the mandatory detention statute, that the defense conceded Combs is violent. They conceded that at trial, quote, we own the domestic violence. That's what the defense had said. The judge also made the point that it was impossible for the defense to demonstrate that he poses no danger, particularly given his violence after the searches of his properties and when he knew he was under investigation. That's the whole Violent Jane episode, attacking Jane, one of the victims in this case. And also that the evidence at trial showed there was a years-long pattern of abuse and violence. But
even after weeks of grueling testimony and public spectacle, even after his defense team fought tooth and nail to portray a man misunderstood, persecuted, and ultimately found not guilty on major charges, Diddy stood there stunned, hands clenched, jaw tight, as the judge denied him the one thing he thought he still had left, his freedom. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not after the verdict. Not after the smoke had cleared and the gavel had hit the wood. Diddy believed that the worst was behind him. That whatever was left to face, at least he'd face it on his terms, outside prison walls, with the press at his command and his lawyers spinning the narrative. But no. The judge made it crystal clear. There would be no comfort, no home, no entourage, just a cold return to a cell. And Diddy, he snapped. Not in words, not in a meltdown, but in expression. His eyes hardened.
Denying Combs' release once again, and given that his sentencing has officially been confirmed for October 3rd, that was agreed by both the defense and the prosecution yesterday, could he get out beforehand? It's an interesting question. Let me bring in right now a special guest. I am joined by one of the most renowned bail bondsmen, probably in the country, definitely in New York, Ira Judelson. Ira, thank you so much for coming here on Sidebar, and pleasure to meet you.
You too, Jess. Pleasure myself.
Let's talk a little bit about what you do. Talk about what you do. I don't know if everybody completely understands the process and your role in it.
You know, it's funny. Not a lot of people understand the world of bail. They think that a bondsman just raises his hand and that's where it ends. With me, it starts with the people that you meet, the lawyers, the judges, the DAs, hearing about a bail, putting it together, which could take days, weeks, as in this case that we're talking about right now, Puffy. I started on this case going back almost 7 months ago when they brought me in as a consultant, because federal bail and state bail are two different things. State bail was what most of the bails that I write. Federal bail, they don't need a bondsman. They do go through pretrial services. But a lot of times major attorneys will bring me in to consult because they'll be denied and they'll say, hey, what do we do? So in this case with Puffy, I got brought in and we talked about possibly renting out his plane and keeping it in Honolulu. We talked about surrendering his passport, his family's passports. We talked about putting up his house. We talked about private security 24/7. We talked about a call log seat to see who's going to call him, also who's going to come see him, who's going to come in, who's going to come out, letting the government see what they have. So if anybody walks in.
His jaw locked. A silent fury radiated off of him as he tried to process the reality that even after securing a not guilty verdict on the most damaging charges, the system still wasn't letting him walk free. Because the verdict wasn't a clean slate. It wasn't a declaration of innocence. It was a split decision. He may have dodged the most serious bullets, but the shadows remained. Allegations still lingered. Testimonies still echoed in the judge's mind. And the court wasn't about to let him out without consequences. The public didn't know what to do with the news. One moment, headlines were shouting, Diddy acquitted. The next, they were whispering something far more disturbing. Diddy's bail denied again. It was a verdict within a verdict. A message sent without being spoken, that sometimes freedom isn't about charges. Sometimes it's about trust. And in that courtroom, the judge made it very clear, there was no trust left. Diddy's legal team scrambled. They objected. They appealed. They begged for reconsideration. But the judge was unmoved. Because behind the media circus, the glitz, and the carefully curated defense.
Very unique bail package. And you didn't tell me if it was unique. $50 million, right?
Yes.
The idea of private security. It was an interesting argument because who would monitor him. It was interesting because the prosecution at one point had said it's not fair, right? He's a wealthy celebrity who's providing a bail package that other people in his similar position wouldn't be able to provide. Now the defense was like, well, the only reason we're presenting a package like this is because of what he's accused of and his wealth and his resources. We have to address that in a certain way. The reason it's so extensive is because of his wealth and resources. That bail package that was put forward was rejected by the court. What did you make of that?
Well, at that time, the judge was looking at the RICO Act and sex trafficking. So, Puffy was looking at possibly 25 years, or more, depending on what the guidelines were based on if he was convicted. So at 55 years old, at that time, it's almost a life sentence. So, and he has a lot of wealth and he had a private plane. So the judge was looking at that. Plus, in the federal system, they look at danger to the community. Where in the state system, they're not allowed to look at that. They look at risk of flight. So I think with all the letters behind that were coming in that we were not really privy to from a lot of the alleged victims, I think the judge made a decision that, hey, this is not going to be sufficient enough. I thought that at the end, he kind of, when we brought it on our private security team and we showed him who was going to be doing it, we did Sam Bankman-Fried. So we knew that, we would be completely covered on that end. And we gave him the idea of there would be no Wi-Fi in the building that we were looking at, and that he would not be able to really be able to connect with anybody but his legal team and his family. We thought at that point that maybe we had a chance, but at the end, the judge denied it, and that's where we stood. And now on this case coming forward, after the convictions, after he wasn't convicted, at the end, we didn't know what he was going to do. So, when Mark reached out to me afterwards, we started thinking about putting another bail package together.
And what is that bail package and by the way, is this a bail package that you think could be submitted again even after the judge just denied bail?
Well, The judge denied bail based on the statute, and the statute stated a certain amount of information that part of the Mann Act that was not eligible for bail. There are certain circumstances that can be done. We're going to regroup again. I know that they were going to go talk to Mr. Combs again and see what happens there. They have the October 3rd date. And I don't know where he stood. As of the other day, he wanted to get out. I don't think anybody wants to be at MDC where he is. So we're going to reconvene and see what happens, at a later date. We could go back with another package.
Would it require him to stay in New York? Would it be him to be, I know he wanted to go back to his property in Miami, Florida. And there's also an interesting question, I think, that his defense put forward. He just got his life back. That's what they said. He wasn't convicted of the top charges. He was convicted of transportation to engage in prostitution, but he would be a fool to try to violate any of those conditions when potentially he may get a rather lenient sentence compared to what he was facing.
The court still saw a man tied to chaos, tied to allegations that, while not enough to convict, were more than enough to haunt. The decision came after a particularly emotional statement from the prosecution. They didn't ask for a retrial. They didn't challenge the verdict. Instead, they reminded the court of the broader picture, of the lives affected, the trauma described. The evidence that may not have sealed a conviction but painted a disturbing portrait of a man the system wasn't ready to trust. And then there was the judge's own statement. Cold, measured, unforgiving, this court may respect the jury's verdict, but it does not forget the disturbing patterns that emerged. Bail is not a right. It is a privilege, and that privilege is denied. Gasps echoed in the room. Diddy's supporters sat frozen. Even the press couldn't keep up with the contradictions. Not guilty, but not free. Innocent on paper, but shackled in practice. And Diddy, his hands trembled. He muttered something under his breath. His lawyer put a hand on his shoulder, but the fire in his eyes had returned. That rage, that disbelief, that look of a man, the moment hits, a truth that froze the room, who thought he'd won, only to realize he never even stood a chance. Back in his holding cell, sources say Diddy was inconsolable, pacing, yelling, throwing his coat across the room, furious not just at the court, but at the betrayal.
Disagreements as to how long the defendant should serve as far as his time goes, but either way he'll still have time served. And so depending on whether it's 51 to 61 months or like the defense wants 21 to 27 months, it'll ultimately be up to the judge to make that decision.
And didn't the prosecutor say something about a pre-sentencing investigation report? And just to give everybody an idea about what that is, that you got to give the judge as much information as possible before sentencing, and particularly where there's a sentence that's based a lot on the judge's discretion. And that usually consists of, an interview with the defendant, history, background, family, education, employment, criminal history, finances, health, alcohol, drug use. You speak to family members, friends, employers. There's court records that are reviewed, and school records and financial records. They look at the offense as well. They speak to law enforcement, victims. What did the prosecution say about a pre-sentencing report? Anything about that?
Yeah, so the prosecution didn't have as long of an argument today, Jesse, as maybe the defense did, but the government kind of pointing back to case law and saying that they're happy to be working with the probation office. I will say that there was a part, this was after the judge had initially denied Sean Combs bail and being able to walk out of the courthouse today. And I did see when Maureen Comey was making these arguments on behalf of the government that Justin Combs was kind of sitting inside the gallery, really kind of shaking his head. So it seems like from the government's point of view, they just want a little more time to get everything in order in terms of having Sean Combs sit down with somebody, I guess, from the probation office to kind of really do an interview. But the government was like, you know what, the statute is clear. The only thing that's exceptional about this defendant is his wealth, the violence, and his brazenness. He's an extremely violent person. He showed no remorse. His brazenness is unmatched. He used prostitutes. He assaulted Jane, and it was not self-defense. And then the government said something that I don't even think we heard at trial, Jesse. The government said that he invited Jane to the hotel room where Sean Combs was ultimately arrested, where he had the drugs, where he had the lighting set up. And then the defense was kind of, I think, a little upset by the government's argument there because Mark Agnifilo said, you know what, listening to Miss Comey makes me appreciate that we have jurors. But either way, at the end of the day, bail is still denied for the defendant. So Sean Combs isn't walking out of that courthouse today. He'll go back to MDC Brooklyn, and then we'll see what happens next at his sentencing hearing, or at another hearing prior to that. But then
we'll talk about that. Didn't Mark Agnifilo, push back a little bit? Didn't he push back on the judge's decision a little bit? He had some things to say.
A little bit or a lot of it, Jesse? I think it was more kind of a lot of it. So during the defense's argument there, Mark Agnifilo making these arguments, he said, Your Honor sat through this entire trial. As good as, probations are, you sat through this trial. And they were kind of really pushing for an expedited...
He thought he'd played the game, right? That the optics were in his favor. That public opinion would shift. But none of it mattered. Because this wasn't a PR war. It was a courtroom. And the rules were different. Social media erupted. Fans and critics went to war online. Some called it justice delayed. Others called it systemic punishment. If he's not guilty, one fan tweeted, then why is he still in a cage? But others weren't so quick to sympathize. Just because you beat the charges doesn't mean you're clean, another post read. And the judge knows it. The album drops. The press releases. The damage control. None of it worked. Because no spin could rewrite the truth that sat heavy in the air. Diddy wasn't going home. Even celebrities weighed in. Some stayed silent. Others reposted cryptic messages. One well-known figure tweeted, "Sometimes the universe writes its own verdict." And in the silence of the courtroom, as Diddy was led away yet again, one thing became clear: this wasn't the end. Not for him. Not for the story. Not for the victims. Not for the truth. This was just the next chapter.
It might. On the other hand, they could say, no, the defense thoroughly cross-examined these witnesses, confronted them about problematic texts and Instagram posts or social media posts and alleged actions and staying with him. I mean, they really focused on the idea that these alleged victims could leave, and they eventually did leave, and then nothing happened to them. That's what, the defense's argument. So they might say, the defense said this is all about money. They were all out for something. They were never sex trafficked victims. It'll be curious to see what the jury thinks. And, the defense has said this is all about domestic violence. It's about love. It's about jealousy. It's not a federal crime. Real quick, because I know you have to jump in, I want to ask you a couple more things. So Agnifilo also hit upon, I think, one of the arguably weaker points of the case, right? Racketeering conspiracy. He was saying what? That Sean Combs is the only one charged here. There was no one testified that was part of a criminal enterprise. There's no evidence anyone that was a co-conspirator, including Christina Courtroom, his former chief of staff. Did you feel that was a key moment, really striking at the heart of racketeering conspiracy? There's no criminal agreement. There's no criminal enterprise.
Right. I think it definitely is, because even Mark Agnifilo was saying things along the lines of, other celebrities, they use their assistants to go get them stuff. They're not celebrities who just walk into CVS. In terms of the security, even the security all has firearms because they are security guards. They're professional guards. They have the license to carry, all of those things. And even just kind of bringing back just the HSI raids where Mark Agnifilo is kind of like, well, the guns just miraculously were all just, they were all brought out. No one knew where they came from. They could have been under the children's bed. All of that stuff. But in terms of just the RICO conspiracy and some of the alleged co-conspirators, Mark Agnifilo said that everyone needs a KK, that KK was somebody who was always Sean Combs' right-handed woman, that type of thing. And I will say, when Mark Agnifilo said that everyone needs a KK, I did see Sean Combs over at the defense table kind of nodding his head along. But Mark Agnifilo saying that he's not charged with racketeering, but racketeering conspiracy. And he points out that the government never called a co-conspirator to the witness stand. So the defense kind of even pointing out the particular incident with Cassie and Carrie Morgan, both who had testified during this trial, but about the hammer incident where Sean Combs had allegedly come over to, I believe it was either Cassie's apartment with a hammer, and that he was kind of threatening her. But the defense was pointing out that during this time, Cassie and Carrie Morgan, they didn't call police to turn in Sean Combs. What they ended up doing was calling Christina Courtroom and D-Rock. And then Mark Agnifilo said, did anyone say that KK or D-Rock was a co-conspirator? He said that the government is making it sinister, that he has personal security, and says that Agnifilo also pointed out that Sean Combs isn't charged with firearms, just as an outright charge. And so,
because justice isn't always clean. It's not always loud. And sometimes the real punishment isn't the sentence. It's the silence that follows a verdict. The silence that echoes when the door to your cell slams shut, and you realize the world outside is moving on without you. Diddy lost it in court. Not just because of what was said, but because of what wasn't. Because no matter how much he fought, how many lawyers he hired, how many narratives he controlled, he couldn't escape the weight of what he had become in the eyes of the law. And as the doors closed behind him, and the cameras finally stopped flashing, the truth settled in. He may have walked out of the trial without a conviction, but he's not walking out of that cell. Not yet. Not today. Maybe not ever. Because the court doesn't just look at what's proven. It looks at what's believable. And after everything, Diddy's story, his version of innocence, just wasn't. This time, the judge didn't need evidence. He only needed a reason. And he found it. Bail denied again. And maybe that's the most telling verdict of all.